Hi there, and welcome to this latest episode of Totally Unscripted. So today we've got quite a bit to get through. So in a second or two, Bruce is going to talk about the new Sheets Developer Metadata, which is available now. So this has got some interesting functionality within Google Sheets. Before that, we got some news and releases. So we'll release updates. So we'll go through that just to highlight a couple of things. If you want to post a comment or a chat, we're monitoring the YouTube chat, and also there is a Google AppScript Slack channel, which we'll highlight so in a second about how you can join that. But if you're already on that platform, there is a Totally Unscripted channel, and we'll monitor that for questions. So welcome to Steve and Bruce, who are joining us in the Hangout. I've shared the Hangout link if anyone else wants to drop in and contribute to this session. So moving on. So what have we got? So in terms of news from Google, there's been a couple of things. So one of the things I always get asked is how sustainable is Google AppScript? Will Google pull the plug any second? And there was a post recently which I think underlines more evidence that Google AppScript is quite embedded within Google itself, which I think is a good sign. So this was a post on how the issue tracker for Google AppScript, which is part of a bigger issue tracker that Google use for all their products, is actually there's lots of AppScript behind that in terms of notifications. So there was a post recently highlighting this, and as part of that, it also highlighted that there are over 70,000 weekly active scripts within Google alone. So you know, Googlers are having fun with AppScript. It would be nice to see some more activity from Googlers if they've got nice bits of script in the communities. I know there's some within the developer relations team that share bits and pieces, but perhaps be good to be seeing a bit more. So the other big announcement was related to Slides. So previously there was Slides API and Slides, I think, Advanced Service, but now there's a Slide service, and also there's Slide add-ons. So if you go into Google Slides, there is the tool script editor, so you can start coding away with bits and pieces. If you previously used the Slides API, it's slightly different as a Slide service. It's more like the Docs and Sheets service. So there's instead of doing kind of batch updates to Slides as JSON objects, you can kind of drill down into individual elements of Slides. Bruce, I think you've released something already on the Slides add-on front.
Well, actually, I've got an add-on that does both Slides and Sheets. So in other words, it's the same add-on. It detects which one it's running in. But because there's not really a way to publish it yet to be in both contexts, it's only working in the Sheet mode right now. Because I don't want two different add-ons doing the same thing. So I'm just waiting for the ability to publish in both contexts, and then I'll post about it then.
Mm. Okay, I think have you got an issue ticket open on?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Okay, so we'll maybe dig that out and share that if people are interested in that, and they can start that.
Martin, I also saw a question that was on the Google Plus community, where someone was asking with the Slide service, does it have like cursor position, where the cursor is? And I believe the answer is no, because we didn't see it there. Have you heard anything about?
I've looked at the Slide service, and cursor position isn't something I recall being there.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so it's less of kind of the Google Docs side of thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem, because you can always put something somewhere, then people can drag things, right? So
I haven't looked to see if there are any event-driven stuff. So on change, I haven't looked to see if there are any triggers that you can hook into there for the development side. I don't know, Bruce, if you...
So don't forget what the slides service in AppScript is an AppScript wrapper for the slides API.
Mhm.
And of course, the slides API is not really designed to be container bound. So therefore, unlike Docs, which doesn't have an API, in fact, it's not really as bound to the container sheet as the other ones are. It may come in time, but right now it's a wrapper for the Slides API. So everything you can do in the Slides API, you can also do in Slides, which means, of course, that you don't have some of those kind of interactive things.
Mm-hmm. So early days, but nice to see again the AppScript platform developing, and another opportunity for add-ons development. So some more marketplaces for you to start looking at. So as part of the slides release, there was actually a blog post from Lucidchart, just detailing some of the bits and pieces that they did in the development. So if you want the kind of behind the scenes, you can look at that. So there was quite a big outage in October, early October, which certainly I was trying to do some script projects at the time, and I just gave up in the end. It seemed to, in terms of project creation within the cloud platform, there was an issue which impacted on Google AppScript. So it was nice. Wesley Chun, who's a developer advocate at Google, actually posted on the Google AppScript community just to update us on that situation. I think there were a couple of other issues in the tracker as well recently related around performance. I don't know, Steve, if there was anything that you comes immediately to mind for you.
No, I don't recall anything right now.
So if you do encounter problems with AppScript, general advice is have a look in the issue tracker, see if there's anything for you to star and follow, or post in communities or the issue tracker if you're detecting something. So it's actually been quite a busy period as well for release notes. So this is from the Google AppScript official documentation. So in September, there were some updates to the Gmail service, so around draft messages, and also the priority inbox. There was also, as we've covered, the update around slides. There were a number of calendar service, group service, and spreadsheet service updates. So in the case of calendar, there were a number of new methods added. I think some of these have been long-standing issue tickets. They've finally been resolved. So just to highlight those, and the documentation goes into more detail about those. The other one is OAuth client verification for add-ons. So Steve, I don't know if you want this was something that you picked up quite quickly, and I don't know if you want to talk to this a bit.
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, it came to my attention when I was working for a client. 3 add-ons were published, and it passed. We got the acknowledgement that it was approved, and then we went to the public, domain to look at it, and we got the unsafe warning message. And of course, I scratched my head to say that's not supposed to happen with the add-on process. So then I noticed the next day, after contacting someone, that they did change the process, where before you submit your add-on for review, you're now supposed to, just like with other web apps, submit the form for the OAuth client verification process. So now that's a new step. It's no big deal. It's just an extra step. So
the continued evolution of AppScript. Did you sense this causing frustration for people? Did anyone get caught in limbo between?
Well, I did, but I don't recall anyone else on the add-on community posting that. However, it does remind me of another post that's slightly off topic, and that is I had a post out there a couple weeks ago about some people were reporting a delay of the normal approval process for add-ons.
Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks, wasn't it, or more?
Right. And then I heard back from one of the Google contacts saying that there was a delay, but they're back on track and everything should be fine. And so we went another week or so with no complaints, but then just this week, I saw a couple of people saying they're waiting a little long again. So I think it's just a matter of, the flow of work they have during the week.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things we have to be patient with, I guess.
So that's useful to know. And again, there is the G Suite add-ons community as well, where you can, if you've got add-ons specific questions or tips and bits and pieces you want to share. Moving on to some of the community stuff. So there's quite a lot of stuff that has been picked up. So well, I've kind of picked up, and I thought I'd just go through a couple of these. So just kind of following on from last month's Totally Unscripted, where we were talking about Data Studio and community connectors. So this is a way, basically it's AppScript is used to provide data into Data Studio. And Dimu has posted something that was quite interesting. So in the official documentation for community connectors, it mentions create a manifest file within the script editor, and this just doesn't exist right now. So there is, within the community connectors, it is, I think, a developer preview, so you have to sign up. So there's obviously something Google are working on around manifest files for Google Apps Script. So when we get more information about those, that we can share, we will. So again, something else around something that appeared then disappeared rather quickly. Barry Roberts came across and managed to grab a screenshot of a script manager, which was under the tools menu in Sheets. So again, we've got no more details on this. Again, indication that Google are tinkering behind the scenes. This was actually a nice post I thought Bruce put in around the offset function. So this is in the Sheets service. So there are a number of ways that you can use offset. The way that Bruce highlighted was just to grab the header row. I thought that was a nice tip. Hopefully you can start using that one in your script projects. So here was another one that related to new Google Sites. So previously with old Google Sites, there was a script editor in there, and you could publish basically widgets and web apps within the old Google Sites. With the new sites, there wasn't anything, but Google have started permitting people to embed URLs. So there's been updated guidance that Steve's highlighted on the official documentation about the process. Basically, you're just publishing as a web app and then using the URL in Google Sites. So I had a quick test of this earlier, and sometimes when you publish web apps and embed them in other websites, you get the annoying this app wasn't made by Google. So that's not visible when you're embedding a new Google site. So it's a very clean look. So again, you can start considering how you're going to use Google Apps Scripts in new sites, so it might bring more people across to new sites. I don't think, was there anything else? Was this something you got to play with, Steve, or?
No, I didn't actually play with it per se, but before this, I wrote a Chrome extension to
that was right, yeah.
It kind of get you there before they had this. So this is much better. So now if someone wants to use the new Google Sites, and have a app script web app embedded, it's possible. So.
Yeah, yeah. So one bit of advice I think that came out of this comment thread is when you're putting your published web app URL in, make sure it's not your test the latest code version. So the one with the dev at the end of it. You want the exec version, or that will cause you some headaches. So this was another useful post from Demo Design. So just it's probably worth just delving into that one. It's looking at how you set up push notifications in Google Apps Script, which isn't straightforward, just because of URL fetch doesn't have all the header information that you need. So this was quite a nice post to the community, just detailing or outlining how you could do that with Firebase. Something else, Andrew Roberts started a community projects collaboration ideas list. Basically crowdsourcing knowledge, expertise, enthusiasm around different projects. So there are various links there for you to submit stuff for that. So early days with that, but we might revisit that one and start highlighting some of the projects that get off the ground. So again, it's nice to see the community coming together and contributing on stuff like this. So at the start of the show, I mentioned, and we mentioned last month, that there was a new Google, well, there have been a couple of attempts, I think, of Google Apps Script Slack channels, but we've got another one going thanks to Andrew Roberts and Jonathan Broughton, I think, have been the key drivers behind this. And as part of that, Jonathan Broughton has actually developed a very nice Google Apps Script powered sign-up form for Slack. Slack can be a bit problematic sometimes in terms of sign-ups. Jonathan's documented a very simple form. So if you've got other Slack communities that you want to provide a means for people to signing up, you can check out Jonathan's article on that, and you can sign up to the Google Apps Script Slack channel as well. We've talked quite a bit in previous shows around Firebase. So this is just another data solution around Firebase. How relevant this is going to be Google Apps scripters, not entirely sure. Firestore, it just seems like a bigger version of the real-time database with better querying. So Bruce, you're quite a avid Firebase user. Is there anything in Firestore that caught your eye as useful?
Yeah, I've started to use Firestore on a project I'm doing right now. I think it's it's more scalable than Firebase, and it's got, as you say, better querying capabilities and so on. But aside from that, it's kind of pretty much the same thing. It's considered to be a document database rather than real-time database, although it actually is. So it's kind of like MongoLab. It's kind of like MongoDB if you use that. I think the recommendation from Firebase is, if you're already using Firebase real-time database, and don't change. But if you're starting a new project, then may as well use this. So as I say, I've only just started to use it in a new project. So maybe next time I'll tell you how I find it. But the real-time database from Firebase is great, and loads of people that use AppScript also use Firebase. So I assume that they'll now move on to the Firestore.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see if there's any interesting developments AppScript related to that. This something from Bruce. So there are a couple of authentication libraries out there. Bruce has been developing Go. So Bruce, you've recently pushed out a couple of new features for Go, which I really like. I don't know if you want to quickly flag those.
Yeah, so there's obviously lots of different flavors of OAuth 2 authentication, and the easiest ones is service accounts and so on. But the more complex ones is where you have to ask for a user's authorization to be able to do something. And the problem before is that you needed to create a kind of a your own web app to be able to ask the question if it's okay to do something within AppScript, or sorry, within OAuth 2. Which meant you had to create a web app or a sidebar or something like that, which was a pain because it had nothing to do with what you were trying to do in your script. So now Go is able to do that for you, so you don't have to care anymore about needing to do HTML service or anything like that. You just say, I want one, and you just got to say where about to put it. So that was the first thing. And then additionally, I've added a few different kind of services and different kinds of OAuth 2 variations as they come along. It's very easy to add them. So I've provided a custom service to allow people to use services it doesn't know about. But better, if you do that and you do create a configuration for some service that I don't know about, then give it to me and I'll put it in so that everyone can use it.
That's great. I did a couple of YouTube examples recently. So the first one used the OAuth 2 AppScript library, and the second one used Goa. So you can dig those posts out from my blog, and you can actually see the differences in terms of the setup. And given this new development that Bruce is, I'll probably need to revisit that and show how you can do it even quicker. But you can see, I found the Goa one to one kind of the usual kind of learning curve with these things, but once you got your head around it, it seemed very straightforward. And so I'm definitely a Goa convert, so I'll be Goa all the way from here. So finally, just to highlight, we're coming into the GDG DevFest season. Google have a number of developer groups around the world, and between August and the end of November, a lot of these, if not most, put on some sort of day of to bring the community together. So there's a link there, and we'll share the slides after the show, where you can find out a DevFest close to you. If you're in London on the 11th, Bruce and myself will be presenting in London. So if you want to say hello, please pop by. Tickets are free, but you do have to sign up. Bruce will be talking about Google AppScript. I'm taking a break from AppScript to talk about Google Analytics. But hopefully there'll be good events. So have a look to see what's going on. Steve, have you been to DevFested before?
Actually, I haven't.
Well, I remember seeing some. I know Florida is a big, big state, but I think there's a couple of things going on in Florida. So
yeah, there is one coming up in November here, actually.
So that kind of wraps up. There's lots of bits and pieces. Hopefully that's been useful for you. So one of the things we didn't mention as part of that roundup was the sheet developer metadata. But Bruce has been doing a number of posts in the run-up to this show about this, and he's going to go into a bit more detail about that. So over to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Martin. Let me do the sharing the screen thing. Okay, so am I sharing?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, that was smooth this time. So what we're going to look at is what's called Sheets Developer Metadata. They've been around now. They were in a kind of a preview state for a little while, where the API for it was available, but it wasn't actually built directly into AppScript. So you could get at it through the Sheets API, and of course you still can. But now it's also part of the Sheets Advanced service, so you're able to use it directly from AppScript. So It's a good time to get to know it. So first of all, what is it? It's a way of associating data with particular locations in a spreadsheet, which is pretty useful. You could think of it as being like a properties service, except with the added attraction of being able to specify a location. So what that means is, let's just say this column in my sheet here. Now, let's just say that I want to know where that is from my app script, but let's just also say that someone could be changing it by changing the name of the column or inserting a new column, or maybe changing the name of the sheet on which it appears or something like this. Then my app script might not work anymore because things wouldn't be where they used to be. So that's one thing that the Sheets metadata does, is to track locations. So that column, even if I move it somewhere else, the Sheets metadata will keep it up to date to where its new location is. And when you talk about it and access it by a key that you give it, then it will know where it now is compared to where it used to be. So that's kind of like super useful. You can also have metadata at different levels. So you can have it for the spreadsheet as a whole. And what you might want to do there, for example, is to store some information, developer information, about what the spreadsheet's for, or when it was last updated, or who updated, or something like that. You can also have metadata at sheet level. So each sheet in your spreadsheet can have its own metadata. And you can also have it by row or column. So for example, I could have metadata about that row. And if that row moves somewhere else, the metadata will still point at that row, which allows me to know what I've stored about it, in other words, the key value pair of associated with the metadata, and specifically the location that it's now at. So I think that's pretty smart stuff, and it really makes a difference. I'll show you some examples of how that can be useful, and specifically how to use it in just a sec. So just to finish with this spreadsheet before we move to the code, what I'm going to work on is I'm going to take a copy of this sheet so that we can play around with it without messing up my original data. We're going to create some metadata for that column and for that column. And we're going to create some metadata for the spreadsheet as a whole, and also for the copy of the sheet that we're going to make during the script. So let's take a look at the code. So we're going to start off by running setup. So what setup's going to do? Can you see that okay? Do I need to expand it? Martin, do I need to make it bigger, or is it?
It looks okay to me.
Okay, good. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just copy the sheet. So that's nothing to write home about. But then we're going to create some metadata. Now, the thing is about the developer metadata is it's kind of complicated, the structure of the response that you get back. And even the request that you make is also fairly complicated. So, of course, there's a library to be able to make that a little bit easier. But to start with, we'll do it in vanilla app script. So let's take a look at that function, create some metadata. So this is the function here. And like everything in the Sheets API that updates, it actually does it in batch. So in other words, you don't do it one thing at a time, or you can, but you typically don't do it one thing at a time. You make up an array of requests that you want to perform, and make one request to the API, and it does them all at once in sequence. Exactly the same as the Slides API as well, which we talked about earlier on. So just before I go through the detail of what a request looks like, one of the useful things that I always do when using metadata is to copy the documentation, what all the different resources look like. You can see there's quite a lot of them, and they're fairly complicated. So rather than going back and forwards to the documentation, I just copy that in here so I can quickly find out what it's doing. Otherwise, I get totally confused. So that's always a good thing to do. Let's get back to the function then. So my first job is to create some requests. So a request consists of an array of individual requests, and each individual request contains a property that describes the thing that you want it to do. So in this case, I want to create some developer metadata. And that takes an object, which is called a developer metadata object, which is in that comments that we looked at the bottom of my script, and also obviously in the documentation. And it looks like this. It's got a label or a property of developer metadata, so it knows what it is. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in a developer metadata object. In this case, I'm supplying a key, so I'll be able to find that again later. And I'm supplying a value, which can be anything that you like, anything you want. I'm just adding a couple of things about when this was created. And then I've got a location, which is saying that this developer metadata object applies to the entire spreadsheet. And then I've got a thing called visibility. Now, just like the properties service, there's the concept of being able to look at some data that's associated with a document or with a user and everything else. But in the case of metadata, there's two visibilities. There's document and there's project. If you specify document, this metadata will be able to be found by anybody who's able to access this document. By the way, when I say be found, it's only visible through a script. You can't look at it through the spreadsheet UI or anything like that. You have to write a script to be able to see it. And the second visibility you can have is project. And what that means is that the metadata is only visible through a script that uses the same console project. And so in AppScript terms, that would be the same script typically. So if you think about the property service again, then you know that everything in each of the three flavors of property service in AppScript applies to the script that you're in. Even a document applies to the script that you're in accessing this document. Whereas with the metadata, you can make this metadata available to other things in the script that's wrote the thing in the first place. So in this case, my document is saying that anybody who looks at this document, any script that's able to access it, can see this metadata. Okay, so that's my first one. I'm creating something that's called spreadsheet details, and I'm saying that the location of it is the entire spreadsheet. The second one I'm going to write is for a specific sheet. So I'm going to call this one, it's exactly the same format as above. I'm going to call this one sheet details. And I'm going to write some arbitrary data there as well. I'm just writing some things, it could be anything you want. And this one for location needs the sheet ID of the sheet to which it applies. So that means that even if I change the name of the sheet or the position of it or something, it will always still apply to the original sheet. The third one I'm going to write is something that's at a row level. So what I want this to do, because I'm saying range A2, I want it to apply to, actually I'm not saying it that, I'm saying it through a dimension range. So I'm saying start index 1, end index 2, which actually applies to row 2. In my spreadsheet, it's going to be that row there. So I'm associating some metadata with that second row in my spreadsheet. And so the location this time, well, first of all, that's its name I'm going to give it. And the location that I'm giving it is a dimension range object, which is described at the bottom. And that needs a sheet ID, what kind of a dimension it is, whether it's rows or columns, where it starts, and kind of where it ends. Now that's probably a bit confusing because the start index starts at 0. So when it says 1, it really means 2 in terms of spreadsheets. And the end index doesn't really mean where it ends. It means the one after it where it ends. That kind of sounds weird. But if you use JavaScript slice function, then it's exactly the same concept as that. Okay, so although that says start index 1, end index 2, it actually means row 2, and it's only one row wide. Okay, and then the last one I'm going to do is this column. So it's exactly the same as before, except this time I say columns, and my start index is 6 and 7. So we go there, we're talking about this column here. Okay, and then I'm creating one at a column level that we're not going to use right now, but we'll use later on. So we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to run something, and it's going to do the entire 5 things in one go. So here's how we apply that request. Very straightforward. We call the Sheets Advanced Service. We call the spreadsheets collection within that, and we tell it to do a batch update, and the request to use is that array that I've just created of all that stuff. So hopefully that'll work. Let's run setup. Okay, so it looked pretty good. Nobody complained. And so in my setup, I've got a few logs going on, so we can have a look at what it wrote out. Take a look at the logs. So the first thing is the response from the API create batch request. Now, this is what came back from the Sheets API, and it is a maze of properties, as you can see, loads of stuff. And it's really quite difficult to make any sense of that. And so one of the criticisms I would have, in fact, about this API, which I really like, is that the responses and resources are rather complicated, and it's quite hard to, when you're like 6 or 7 properties deep, to know what's going on. So I like to tidy that up a little bit. So I've taken the replies and selected out just the stuff that I want to see. I only really want the ID, the key, and the value of each of the things I've just created. So if we now look, and I'm logging out here. So if we now just take a look at the logs, the log again, and look at the second thing, which is the tidied version of that, which is here, then we can see that we've just now got this stuff, which I'll just put into a JSON tidier upper so we can take a better look at it. Okay, so now each one of these members of this array describes some metadata that I've just created. So every piece of metadata has got a unique ID, which we can use to index it. But it's also got a key. So these are the keys that I created. I assigned these keys to it, and these were the values that I wrote. So I wrote 5 of these, so there should be 5 of these here. Let's just check. There we go. Okay, so that's a little bit more usable than what came back from the API. Some of that information might be useful to some people, but this is all I really wanted to see. So now, let's see what else we've got. So the first thing we're going to do is to take back some metadata by its ID. So this one is taking just the first ID, the first one that was created, and it's using the Sheets API, the Sheets Advanced Service, Spreadsheets Collection, Developer Metadata Collection, and then the get method to be able to take back what's actually stored this time. So these were created, these were the response from creating the thing in the first place. So now if I use get, I should be able to pick them up and see what they contain. So let's have a look at what we got there. Okay, so that was the result of that. So this shows us that we are able to, given a key, so in this case spreadsheet details, it could be any of the others, you can go ahead and get back the values that you stored, in this case for spreadsheet level. So I could have written anything I wanted there and be able to get that back. And of course this persists, so if I close it and look at the spreadsheet in a month's time, it'll still be there. Okay, so that was the most complicated thing that we'll be doing today, I think. Before I move on, has anybody got any questions?
So when you're querying back the metadata, can you query it back by the ID it generates? Or?
No, well, no, because typically you don't know the ID. Typically you only know the key. So that's what I'm about to show you how to do that in a minute. Okay.
And just to reiterate, with this being document level metadata, so if you had a standalone script running somewhere else where you and you have access to this spreadsheet, so it's shared with anyone with link, you could grab the spreadsheet by ID, and then you could get the metadata that you've just written here out.
Exactly, as long as you've specified visibility document,
yeah,
rather than visibility project. Visibility project means only the script that created it can read it.
So that immediately seems like a huge, could be really useful within an add-ons context then.
Yeah, well, actually you can already sort of do that using the drive custom properties. However, they're just about the file itself. They're not locational. These things can be. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let's move to searching now, because typically you wouldn't know those IDs. As Martin said, you'd only know the key. So actually, we're going to start from now on. We're going to use a library, so we don't have to go through all that junk again. But the library we can look at in some detail, or you can look at it later if you like. But for the moment, just kind of believe me what it does, and then we can cover it later on. But so the first thing we're going to do is search by key, and these 4 items were 4 of the 5 that I created at the beginning. That was the keys that we gave them, and so just to let you know what the library is doing in this case. It's doing the Sheets advanced service, it's doing spreadsheets collection, developer metadata, and the search method. And that takes this kind of an object. It takes some data filters. And data filters can contain lots of things, but right now we're just using the key. So it contains a developer metadata lookup. By the way, if you're familiar with the Sheets API anyway, or at least the Sheets advanced service, they use data filters already. So the developer metadata property has been added to data filters to be able to cope with this kind of data rather than the regular filters you find in spreadsheets. So this search by key is essentially doing that. Okay. So in this case, we're going to look up each of the 4 items we created, and then we're going to show some results for a few of them. Okay. So let's run that. Hopefully it'll work. Okay. So the first thing that we got back, I think I've only printed out 1 of them. Yeah, this is just this one. So that's the result from having done a search. So again, you've got a fairly long-winded result. You've got a property that says what it is that it's returning the result of, a match developer metadata, then a repeat of the data filters that you gave it, and then the key and value itself, and the ID, and then location, and all sorts of stuff. So that's what that gives, and this is the column level one, which, if you remember, pointed to this column here. So again, I'm going to tidy it up, and in the library I've put a tidy match function, which gets rid of all the stuff that you would get back from a search request. So now if we look at the log file again, the tidied version of that is this. So we'll look at that in a formatted way here. Here we go. So what we got back then is we searched by this key. We got, in return, we got told its ID, what visibility it was at, the value that I wrote to it, but more importantly, its location. So it returns a dimension range object. If you remember when we created this in the first place, we got to know about start index and end index and everything. So now that tells me that this particular column right now is stored there. If I was to move that column, which I'll do later, then you'll notice that these things change. So you'll always know where that column is, even if it gets moved somewhere else. Okay, so that's that. Let's get back to the script. What else have we got in here? Yeah, so another thing is that because the API is all about being as efficient as possible, then you can tell it to do many things at once. Just like when we created it in batch in the first place, we can also tell it to do many searches at once. So we're telling it to get 4 different things here, all at the same time. So the search by key, what will happen is it will blow this data filters out to include this kind of an object for each one of these keys. So now if we run it, we should get back all of it. So let's run it and see. Well, actually, we've already run it, haven't we? Just check the log. So this is this is all the keys at once, the tidied version of it, that is. And we'll stick that in here. Okay, so now we've got one of those descriptions for every one of our things that we created. Okay, so let's get back to what we can do next. So what's really useful, though, is we've looked at how to search for things, but it would be great to be able to just get the data back without having to go off and find a location and then generate a range from the location and then getting the data and everything. And you can do exactly that. So what this get data function is now going to do is to, given our sheet details, and my dogs are barking again. Hang on a minute. Sorry, I have to stop that. Okay, this seems to have calmed down. Yeah, so what this get data does is it's going to go off and take these 3 keys to return the values from the API using those keys. Hang on a minute. Martin, can you talk amongst yourselves for the moment? I'm sorry.
I'll put the intro music on. So to recap, Bruce says attach metadata to different parts of the sheet. And because he specifies it as a document level, that's accessible to anyone else that's running a script that has access to that spreadsheet. And now we're just looking at how to use that data to grab the values straight off.
I'm back, Martin. Okay, so I'm using this other function, get tidy values, because now I don't want to have to repeat all that code many times here. So I'm using this function that's in the library called get by data filters. And what that actually does is it goes to the metadata that's got the key that you've given it, and it directly gets the data from the API without having to find the location and make a range and everything else. So there's a new thing that's been added to the Sheets API to be able to get data by its metadata key rather than by its location and everything. Okay, so let's run that now. Get data. Okay, so that's that done. And so let's see what we're going to get. In each case, I've tidied things up a little bit, but we'll just take a look and see what we have. So what actually gets returned by the get data filters from the API itself is all this stuff, which looks exactly like what you get back from the Sheets API when you're just getting data in the normal way, not using the metadata. So there's a lot of stuff that's unnecessary. So I've got a tidied version of that. And you can see that what you now get is, in fact, just exactly the same data that you would get back from the normal spreadsheet app. So that makes it easy to integrate into any apps you've already got because the data looks exactly the same. So that was the data for the sheet level. So what we've got here now is I've just taken the first few characters of it, but it's data for the entire sheet. If I had let it print out, you would see like zillions of rows. And then the second one, again, you can see what came back from the API. Again, this time it's a column. It's just one column. We're using the municipality column key to be able to get it. And being tidied up here to look like what you would get back from a range that was just one column. And then in this case, we're just taking one row. This is just the first row. So all that worked. You think about it, it's pretty cool because you managed to get back that without needing to know anything about where that column was, because it's all in the metadata. So what that means is that if you've got a script that creates data and does all of this, and then you've got other scripts that want to get that column, they don't have to know anything about the structure of the spreadsheet whatsoever. All they need to know is what the name of the key against which it was stored is. Okay. So any questions before I move to the next thing?
That all seems very straightforward, particularly with your library.
Well, yeah,
being able to get it back as a 2D array.
It's actually pretty straightforward without it as well. But the thing is, you have you create a lot of errors for yourself by getting the structure of the data wrong. So just to get rid of it is the best thing to do. And it's about getting data for a particular cell. Now this is really handy because let's take an example. Let's just say that we wanted to get the data for here. In other words, the intersection of the municipality column and the first column here. So I want to get that value there. Now we've got a metadata for that column. We've got a metadata for that row. Now you can't create a metadata for a cell, so you have to have a way of figuring out what the intersection of two metadatas are. Now there isn't one available in the API, but there is one in the library here. It's really not, I won't bother going into it right now, but it just looks up both of these metadatas, figures out the range that it's at, and figures out the intersection. It could be one cell, or it could be like multiple cells. It's just a square, if you like. And what it actually returns is not a range. It returns a function with which you can make a range. And the reason for that is because when I kind of try, and when I make a library, to not take any top-level objects over into the library, mainly for security. Because if you have a library and people pass their spreadsheet app to that library, for example, you don't really know what the library is doing with your spreadsheet app. So I prefer not to even let that happen. So what this does instead is to return a function which is able to work out a range. Okay, and that will become, if that sounds complicated, it'll become clear in a minute. So we're taking back this function that makes a range, and then we're just going to take a look at what that looks like in a minute. And then we're going to make the range, and to it, we're going to pass the spreadsheet that needs from which to make the range. Okay, and then we're going to use the regular spreadsheet app to be able to get the values that are associated with that range. I could have got the background colors or anything else, but I'm getting the values in this case and then showing them up. So let's run that. Okay, and we'll take a look at the result. So there's the answer. That's this Port Moresby, which is exactly what we wanted. Actually, we're looking at the wrong sheet. We're looking at that sheet. So we're looking at the intersection of that column, which was the first one, and the municipality. And the function that it returns, by the way, is this. That's the code for the function it returns. And it uses something called closure, which you may or may not know about, but that's a way of embedding data from another function in the state it was in when the function was created. So that's how that can work. Okay, so now this is the magic, because now we know that we can get data from a particular cell by running that. So what happens if I mess the spreadsheet up completely? Let's say that I insert a column to the left of that. And now if I run get cell data. Hang on. We still got the right answer, even though I've inserted another column. Let me comment that bit out so we don't get that each time. So let's just say that I now take this and insert it there. So in other words, I've completely changed the data now. Then what we really want it to do is to still be able to get that value, even though it's not in the first row anymore, and even though this isn't in column G anymore. So let's see if it still does it. There it is, so it still works. So that's kind of pretty much it in terms of the how you might use it in a batch mode. But there's another really useful thing which I'll just cover in a second. It'll just take me 5 minutes to do. So, but before we get there, is any questions?
So when you make a copy of the spreadsheet, is the metadata lost? Well, it's not code across on the copy.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Because the metadata is, well, actually, obviously the metadata for the spreadsheet is still existing because that's at the spreadsheet level. Yeah. But the metadata for the sheet is still applying to the original sheet and not the new one because it applies to the ID, the sheet ID. And when you create a new sheet, you get a new sheet ID. So therefore, it doesn't apply to that one. It applies to the old one.
On a spreadsheet level, the same thing. If you copy the spreadsheet, the copied spreadsheet.
You know, I assume so. I've never actually tried it, but one would assume that was the case. Good question, though. Okay, so let's look at something else now. I do have a cleanup function here, which I won't bother going into in much detail, but it's using the batch mode again to create a bunch of delete requests, which we've got here. So it's just exactly the same as before, except this time we'll delete developer metadata, and we can actually use the key to do it. But we can use we can use the ID to do this, but we can also use the key. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I used create metadata, and what that meant is that if you have two value items, hang on, my dogs are about to fight again. Martin, can you help? Sorry. I apologize.
Very quiet fight, I have to say.
Okay, come on.
I find what's interesting is this document level concept. So you could write another script, and if you know the keys to a particular spreadsheet in this case, you have access to it.
Yes.
Because I can see someone writing, starting off at the higher level of Google Drive and leveraging known keys that you would have to know to drill down, to pull out data.
Yeah, I'm back, guys.
Well,
so we were just talking about the document level stuff and how a different script, as long as you have write access to the spreadsheet, you can access the metadata keys. But could that be used maliciously and overwriting your existing keys?
Yeah, so I was just about to say that when you use create metadata key, metadata item, I should say, then what you're going to do there is you're going to create an additional one. So if there's a key A there already, you're going to create two A's. So, however, there is an update. And so in other words, you can use update metadata key rather than create, in which case it will overwrite the original one. Although having said it, but the point is that you need to have write access anyway.
Yeah.
But you can have read access and not read that.
So if you're going to screw up some spreadsheet, you could do far more damage than just metadata.
Absolutely, yeah. If you've got write access, you can do whatever you like, right?
Yeah,
So metadata is the least of your. Okay, so that's that. Where were we? Yeah, I was about to show something else. I was talking about deleting, so I can clean up either by using the IDs, and if there are obviously multiple items for a particular key, it's only you need to do them all. So, but you can also delete with using a developer metadata object, which can have a metadata key in it rather than an ID. So that'll delete everything with a matching key. So I'm going to delete. Now I'm not going to delete everything here that's got these keys associated with it. So I'll run that. Let me ever run it. I can't remember. And now if I run that search thing that I had at the beginning, hopefully it won't find anything. Yeah, there's nothing there. That's good. Okay, so we've cleaned up. And so we'll run setup again, which will create those things, and also it's made a fresh copy of the spreadsheet without any of that changes that we made. Okay, so now imagine that you want to now do an on-edit type thing. Okay, actually I need to open this. I think I've got one already set up. If I'm lucky, I do. Yeah, I do. So normally with an on-edit, you're going to be doing something like this. Let's just say that I want to, where's my sheet? Let's just say that every time I change something in that column, I want a timestamp to appear here. Okay, it's quite a common thing that people like to do. So typically what you do is you do something like this. You'd say, that's the column that I'm looking at for changes. That's the column to update when something changes. And that's the sheet for all the stuff to happen on. And then your on-edit function, which would be a simple trigger, would, if all those things matched, it would put a new date in the column that we told it to put it in. So in other words, if I updated, if I changed this column, what would happen is that the timestamp would appear there. That's all great, except if things change, because if I put an extra column in there, then that script is not going to work anymore, because it's going to be pointing at column 7 rather than column 8, etc., etc. You could use a named range, of course, but named ranges are available through the UI, and people can change those too, and it still won't work. But what they can't do is to change developer metadata, unless, of course, they've got access to that and can write scripts, but in principle, they can't. So that means that developer metadata is a little bit more reliable for dealing with these kind of situations. So this is how you would write a metadata-driven version of that. So first of all, you can't use a simple trigger. You have to use a installable trigger. I don't know if I've set one up. Let's just check. Yeah, I've already set it up. So that's my on-edit we're about to take a look at, and it gets triggered on edit. And the reason that you have to use a installable trigger rather than a simple one is because to be able to access the Sheets API, it needs to check your authorization, and an installable trigger happens after the authorization's been checked, and a simple trigger doesn't. So you can't do things like that need authorization in a simple trigger, but you can do it in a installable one. So that's the first thing, you've got to install it. And then, well, let's just see if it works first of all. So if I change that column here, and then what I'm hoping will happen is that a timestamp will appear here, and it did. Okay, change that column. Okay, so that all works. So if I install an extra column here, and then I do that. Sorry if I do that. Oh, that there, I should say. Then it still works. So if I install another column here and do something down here, and it still works. So that's pretty cool. You can do on edit type things without worrying about people changing the shape of your spreadsheet, because it tracks all that for you. And so let's take a look at how that works. Wrong script, this one. Then the first thing I'm going to do is to sell. I'm not using the library here, by the way, because I just wanted to show you how to do it in vanilla Sheets language. But I do have a little function to do a search for me. We'll look at that in a minute. So I'm saying, first of all, get that column. Now I could have done get both the columns that I'm looking for the address of at the same time. But here I've done it to make it clearer. I've done it as a separate search. And the first thing I need to do is to get the dimension range. The dimension range is that thing that says the start index and everything else. And if I got one, if I got a dimension range, and the range that's being edited right now, the current start index of the dimension range that was returned by looking for the column that had metadata associated with it, and it's the right sheet ID, then I'm in the right place. So it really is that simple. Just check the dimension range again that was stored, which has been maintained automatically by the Sheets API. Compare it to where we are at the moment, and if they match, then I'm good to go. So if I'm here, I know that I'm in the right column. So now I need to go off to the metadata and find the timestamp column, because that might have moved as well. In fact, it did in the example that we just went through. So again, I use the same functions to get the dimension range, and I just do the update as normal, and that's kind of it. Quick look at the searches. So we already looked at how to do a developer metadata search in the previous example, so it's the same as before. We're just using the key and using the search method. And get dim range is kind of like boring, because it's got to go through the entire properties resource that was returned by the search, and it has to keep on checking to see if the property is there, etc., etc. But eventually we end up with the match developer data location dimension range, which is all of that stuff joined together essentially. So you can see why I want to use a library, right? Anyway, that's kind of it. So that is super good, because all those problems you get trying to do things in event-driven spreadsheet type things like this, those problems go away by using metadata. So that's it. I don't have anything else. I think I've done a few posts over the past few days with all the stuff that you're looking at now, in order to, in case people wanted to understand a bit of background before this. But if you want to look at a bit more detail after it, then I'm sure that it'll be on Martin's website, and you can pick up from that.
I think the worrying thing is, as Google Apps developers, we should no longer be in a position of developing add-ons where if you get feedback saying, "Oh, does this work if I move the column around?" or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
No excuses. Is very achievable now.
Yeah, I mean, before we had to do things like use the column heading or something like that.
Yeah.
But we don't even have to do that anymore.
Yeah. One question when you were setting up the metadata on the sheet, you were recording some of your own values as part of that. What's the size limit on how much?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, they're actually quite annoyingly low on quotas for this, and I think it might have changed, but I think it's 30K.
Right.
Is the total number of metadata you can have at the spreadsheet level, and then each sheet can have 30K as well. So that's not, it doesn't sound like a huge amount, to be honest, but they might increase that at some point. Now, the reason is, of course, that the metadata is stored as part of the sheet itself. So that means that when you open a spreadsheet with Spreadsheet app, then it reads the metadata as well. And if there was like megabytes of the stuff, then opening any sheet would take ages, right? So I think they're being a little bit cautious about how much quota they allow to begin with. But it's quite low, so you have to be careful what you use it for. But having said that, I think so. I guess, but I'm not sure. The quota for any individual value that you write against a particular thing would be maximum 30, but minus any other metadata that you've included.
So the 30K is the combined allowance on a sheet level. So if you've got 100 bits of metadata you're recording, they're going to have to be quite small.
Yeah, I think it's, and I'll say I'm not 100% sure of this, but
yeah.
I think it's 30K per individual sheet. So if you've got 100 sheets, you've got 30K times 100, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that was a really interesting walkthrough. Steve, I don't know if you've got anything you want to ask or comment.
Yeah, it's just another excellent contribution. Wow. Yeah, so it's just interesting that you're elaborating on, it's a little different from the property service at the document level. I was just thinking if we had a script that says, okay, I want to start at the drive level, folders and so forth. If I know the keys at, in this case, at spreadsheet level, that I can drill down, right, to get some information or track things. So that's very nice.
So actually, I did a post about this a few months ago. You probably know that a drive file has got custom properties available, and it's like this. You can write a value against a key, and those custom properties are actually searchable through the Drive API. So the body of the post was really, or the purpose of the post was to say, you know what, you don't really need to know spreadsheet names anymore or spreadsheet IDs anymore if you write to the custom properties of the drive what the purpose of the spreadsheet is, because then you can use the Drive API to say, give me my finance spreadsheet. What's my finance spreadsheet for August or something like that, right? Where the custom properties of that file contains it, and then that will return the ID of the file. And then you could go to that idea that you could go to the file, and then you could look inside that spreadsheet at the metadata to see how it was organized. Mm-hmm. So those two things together are quite a powerful combination, especially with the Drive custom properties. If you, let's say, for example, your finance file for August sheet, but that was all screwed up, and now you've got a different spreadsheet. You wouldn't need to tell everyone the new ID of it, because it would be in the custom properties of the new file, and the old one would be gone. Mm-hmm. So all that things fit together quite well, I think. Mm-hmm. If you like, I can put the link to that post in this material as well, because I think it's somehow related.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this will be hopefully a lot for the community thinking about how they can use this. I think one of the when you start talking about metadata, people's eyes can start rolling and they can get bored quite quickly. But I think this is something people should be taking very seriously, because I think it can help in so many different ways.
So yeah, you're right. I mean, metadata, it sounds like a technical term, and you think, wow, I don't know what that is, we'll just ignore it. But it's stuff about something. Is how I like to think of it. It's, tell me stuff about this sheet is a good way to think about it. Tell me stuff about this range,
Yeah, hopefully we'll see lots more examples coming out of the community of people using this. It'd be, I think, worthwhile as well as if we see people using this to spotlight in future shows. keep an eye on what add-ons are adopting these techniques, although that's not always going to be easy to do, particularly if the code's protected.
Actually, I'm using it in my, and remember I told you earlier, I've got an API, sorry, an add-on that works under both slides and sheets that I haven't exactly released yet. So the way I use it is to remember what you were doing the last time you used that particular combination of slide and sheets. So in other words, it remembers settings that you had chosen, remembers where you were, even remembers the active cell, because with that intersection thing that we looked at, you're able to know something about, you're able to figure out a cell, and you can even set the active range to that place from the last time that you used the sheet, something that we couldn't do before.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, for that very informative session. So we haven't got next month's show planned yet, so if anyone's got any suggestions for bits and pieces they'd like to cover, if you go onto the Totally Unscripted website, there's a feedback form, or you can ping us on the usual channels, Google Plus, or as I mentioned, there's a Totally Unscripted channel on the Google AppScript Slack community. I don't know if we want to do something at DevFest in London, Bruce, maybe just quick and short, but we'll play that one by ear.
Yeah, let's see how it goes first, shall we?
Yeah. And with that, I'd just like to thank Bruce for his contribution, and Steve as well for his contribution as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.